The project closed at 3 million. Victor's voice cut through the boardroom like ice. Applause erupted. Everyone clapped, smiling, except me. Because while they celebrated, I realized something chilling. My name wasn't mentioned once, and I was the one who built that deal from nothing. Let me take you back to where this started. Before the betrayal, before the boardroom silence, and long before I understood just how disposable loyalty could be. My name is Samantha Rhodes, and I've been a senior project director at Norview Technologies for 12 years. Not flashy, not political. I've always let my work speak for itself. And it did. Quietly, consistently, successfully. The green energy platform deal had been my baby from the beginning. 11 months of meetings, sleepless nights, and impossible negotiations. There were weeks when I worked 18-hour days, missed dinner with my daughter, even canceled a vacation I hadn't taken in 5 years just to finalize a prototype for our biggest prospect. It wasn't just a project to me. It was a personal triumph. One I thought would finally be acknowledged. That's why I wore that pen to the meeting. It's a silver fountain pen, smooth, old-fashioned, a little scratched. My husband gave it to me on the day I got my first promotion. Use it when you sign something that matters, he'd said, 20 years ago. I had planned to use it today. I'd imagined Victor handing me a contract bonus, or at least a recognition letter. Something symbolic, something real. Instead, I sat there while Victor Crane, our newly hired CEO, soaked in the praise and ran his fingers through his $300 haircut. The contract had been signed, the project approved, the client delighted. But in every word he spoke, I didn't exist. And then came the dagger. Victor smiled and gestured to his right. We'll be moving forward under the guidance of Eva Lansing, our new associate director. Eva, the same Eva who had joined us 3 weeks ago. Young, blonde, impeccably dressed, with no experience in green tech. But, as I had started to suspect, a long and complicated history with Victor, one that had nothing to do with clean energy. She smiled like a woman who'd won something. I smiled too, but mine wasn't real. I could feel my palms grow cold beneath the table. I clenched the pen inside my purse like it was the only thing anchoring me to the moment. Because what was happening wasn't just an oversight. It was a surgical erasure. I was being cut out, completely and deliberately. I didn't speak during the meeting. Not because I was weak, but because I knew something Victor didn't. Clients don't fall in love with spreadsheets or titles. They fall in love with people, with trust, with time. And I had been the one they trusted. When the meeting ended, I walked quietly back to my office. Not defeated, but alert. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to protest. I was going to watch. I was going to wait. And then I was going to remind them all, what happens when you cut out the heartbeat of a deal and think the machine will still run? I sat alone in my office for a long time after that meeting. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just stared at the pen in my hand. This little piece of metal that had once meant progress, respect, and growth. Now, it felt like a relic from a different lifetime. There was no official email, no written announcement, just a quiet wave of whispers that spread through the floor by mid-afternoon. Eva was the new face of the Green Spring Project. And I was no longer anything at all. I kept working that day, answering emails, finalizing deliverables. I did it not because I owed them, but because I needed time. Time to understand how far this betrayal reached, and more importantly, who was part of it. That evening, I requested a meeting with HR. Not formally, just a coffee chat with Diane, someone I'd mentored years ago. She looked uncomfortable, hesitant. "Samantha," she said gently, "I probably shouldn't be saying this, but Victor's been pushing restructuring since his first week. He's looking for a younger strategic vision." His words! I raised an eyebrow. So this wasn't about my performance? She bit her lip. "He's calling it realignment of leadership. And well, he's making sure the budget reflects that, including incentive redistribution. Incentive redistribution. That was code for cutting me out of the profit pool. I nodded slowly. And the Greenspring deal? She sighed. He's trying to categorize it as a team effort, no individual bonuses. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about sidelining me. It was about erasing my ownership. He didn't want to reward the person who made the deal happen. He wanted to rewrite history, one where he and Eva appeared as the masterminds. That night I drove home in silence, the kind of silence that holds 1,000 unsaid things. My daughter Chloe had waited up for me. She was 19, blunt and smarter than I ever gave her credit for. "You look like someone stole your thunder," she said, handing me a cup of tea. I gave her a half smile. "They tried." She paused, watching me. "Let me guess. Your new boss took credit for your work, and some Barbie in heels got the spotlight." I blinked. "How did you—" "Mom, it's corporate. It's always like that." I laughed, the sound bitter in my own ears. But she wasn't wrong. Still, I wasn't ready to become a cautionary tale. The next morning, I got in early. I reread every clause in my original contract. I checked my email logs with the client. I documented timelines. I even printed out copies of all my meeting notes, because if they wanted a paper trail, they were going to get one. What Victor hadn't considered was that people like me don't just walk away. We watch, we listen, and when the moment is right, we act. That afternoon, as I was organizing files, my phone buzzed. A name flashed across the screen, the last name I expected. Ellen Myers, Senior VP of Strategic Development at Core Unity. The client, the $3 million client. I picked up the call. Her voice was low, measured. "Hi, Samantha. I just received a confusing update from your company. It says you're no longer on the project." "Is that true?" I froze. My fingers gripped the pen again. "Yes," I said quietly. "That's true." A pause. "Well, I have a problem with that. I think you and I should talk, privately." I met Ellen Myers the following morning at a quiet little cafe near her office, a place she chose deliberately, away from boardrooms and buzzwords. I arrived 10 minutes early, out of habit. She arrived 5 minutes early, out of intent. "Samantha," she said warmly, sliding into the booth across from me. "I'm so glad you agreed to meet." "So am I," I replied, though the knot in my stomach hadn't untangled since she called. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "I need to ask you something directly," she said, leaning in. "Did you step away from the Greenspring project voluntarily?" I shook my head. "No, I was replaced." "Why?" I hesitated. There was no elegant way to say it. "Because I'm not part of the narrative Victor Crane wants to sell." She exhaled sharply. "That's what I thought." What she said next nearly made me drop my coffee. "We signed that deal because of you. You built the trust. You solved the prototype issue. You even flew to Denver last minute to calm down our compliance team. Victor? Eva? They weren't in the room when it mattered." I blinked, stunned. That trip to Denver had nearly cost me my health. I'd had a fever. I'd taken 2 Tylenols and powered through. Now hearing her say that, it was overwhelming. Too much. Too unexpected. "I'm not just angry," Ellen continued. "I'm insulted. They sent me a new liaison this week, Eva. She didn't know basic figures. She couldn't explain the timeline. She smiled a lot and threw around buzzwords like synergy and vertical integration, as if that would make up for her ignorance. I couldn't help it. I let out a small, breathy laugh. "That sounds exactly right." Ellen's face softened. "I've seen this before. Powerful women who do the heavy lifting, only to be swept aside when it's time to cut the ribbon. It's insulting and exhausting." Her words hit deeper than I expected, because she was right. It wasn't just about me. It was about all of us who had been told to make space when the reward came around. I felt the heat rise in my chest, not from shame, but from a slow, simmering anger that finally had clarity. "So what now?" I asked, my voice steady. Ellen leaned back and folded her arms. "I want to offer you something, not out of pity, because I'm a businesswoman first. I want someone competent, committed, and who knows my company inside and out." She paused. "I want you to come on as an independent advisor, directly to us. You'd work with our internal integration team, same compensation package, possibly more." I stared at her. Independent? Not through Norview? That wasn't just a job offer. That was a shift in power. I began, but she held up a hand. "Take a few days. I know this isn't easy. But Victor made a mistake. He underestimated how loyal clients are when they're treated with respect." I nodded slowly. "Thank you, Ellen. Really, that means more than I can say." We stood up to leave, and she squeezed my arm gently. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply being seen. As I walked back to my car, my mind spun. The bitterness from the boardroom, the insult of being replaced, the sleepless nights, they all began to sharpen into something new. Resolve. I pulled out my phone and sat in the driver's seat for a moment. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I smiled, for the first time in days. That night, I opened my laptop and created a private folder titled Plan B. I reviewed every contact I had from the Green Spring project. Every email, timeline, deliverable. I compiled them into a timeline that made one thing painfully clear. I had been the backbone of the deal. They didn't just try to push me out. They tried to rewrite the truth. And that, more than anything, lit the fire inside me. The next morning, Eva strutted past my office in a pencil skirt too tight for comfort, and a confidence that wasn't hers. She glanced in at me like I was yesterday's news. Oh, how wrong she was. I picked up the phone and dialed one more number. Not to Ellen, to someone else. To someone I hadn't spoken to in years, but who owed me a favor. And just like that, the next piece of my quiet little war fell into place. The number I dialed belonged to Naomi Trask, an old colleague from my early consulting years. She was now the senior compliance officer at Elridge Capital, one of Norview's largest financial backers. We hadn't spoken in almost 5 years, not since we'd both fought tooth and nail to prevent a merger that would have buried dozens of mid-level jobs. She won. I lost. But we respected each other for how we played the game. Now I needed her. She picked up on the third ring. "Samantha?" "Hi, Naomi. I need 15 minutes and your discretion." There was a pause, then a chuckle. "You never call unless something's on fire." "I'm listening." I laid it out, clean and simple. No drama, just facts. The project, the removal, the blatant attempt to reassign credit. And the most important detail of all, the client's growing frustration. "You're telling me Norview's about to jeopardize a $3 million rollout with Core Unity because they pushed out the deal lead to install what? A LinkedIn model with no credentials?" "That's the short version," I said, lips tight. She let out a sharp breath. "Wow, that's not just reckless. That's suicidal." Exactly. Naomi didn't offer me a solution, but she didn't need to. I knew how the world she lived in worked. She only had to ask the right questions during her next financial review call with Norview's board. And knowing Naomi, she would. After we hung up, I sat back and closed my eyes. God, it felt good to move again. Not in bitterness, but in strategy. The next 2 days were quiet, almost eerily so. I went through the motions at work while tracking the slow burn I'd just ignited. Then, on Wednesday morning, it happened. Victor canceled our department's weekly check-in. No explanation, just a one-line email sent at 6:07 a.m. "Team, this week's check-in is postponed. We'll reschedule." Postponed? That never happened. Victor loved those meetings. They were his personal stage. Something was rattling him. That same day, Diane from HR pinged me with a cryptic message. "Something's up. Naomi's name came up in the boardroom this morning. You didn't hear it from me." I smiled at the screen, too pleased, too satisfied. So soon? I hadn't expected the dominoes to fall this quickly. But then came the part that infuriated me. That afternoon, I received a forwarded email, sent company-wide. Eva had been appointed Strategic Vision Liaison for the Green Spring Project. A made-up title if I'd ever seen one. The announcement praised her for her energy, her fresh perspective, and, this one really burned, her deep involvement since the project's inception. What? Since the inception? She'd been there 3 weeks. I closed the email and stared at the wall for a long moment. Too much, too fast, too insulting. I'd played the long game until now. But this was rewriting history in real time. Fine. If they wanted a story, I'd give them one. That night, I wrote a short, polite email to Ellen Myers. Just one sentence. "You might want to take a closer look at today's company announcement regarding Greenspring, specifically the credentials of their new liaison." Then I sent a second email, not to a client, to a friend I'd once helped prep for a panel at the Wall Street Journal's Women in Tech conference, who now happened to work in PR for one of the most watched B2B tech newsletters in the country. Because if Norview wanted visibility, I was going to give it to them. On my terms. By Friday morning, the ripple had become a wave. I woke to 3 new messages, 2 from former colleagues I hadn't spoken to in months, and 1 from Ellen Myers. Hers was brief, but direct. "Thank you. I'll handle it from here." And handle it she did. By 11 a.m., Norview's executive floor was in chaos. Word had gotten around that Ellen had requested a full audit of the Greenspring engagement, specifically asking for the credentials and involvement timeline of the newly appointed liaison, Eva Lansing. She had copied 2 partners, 3 attorneys, and, most damning of all, their procurement integrity officer. Victor's carefully crafted illusion was unraveling, one email thread at a time. Meanwhile, Naomi had done her part too. Elridge Capital scheduled an emergency performance risk evaluation call with Norview's board. And though I didn't hear it firsthand, Diane messaged me afterward. Victor looked like someone had poured cold coffee down his suit. Too perfect. That afternoon, I stepped out for air, walking past the break room just in time to hear Eva's voice. Sharp, flustered, defensive. "They're coming after me like I did something wrong." I didn't lie. Victor told me to say I'd been part of it from the beginning. A beat, then silence. "Too late, Eva. You played dress-up in someone else's role, and the costume never fit." I walked by without a word, but oh, how satisfying it was to witness the beginning of the end. But the real thunderclap came not from a boardroom, but from a blog. The newsletter my PR contact worked for, Tech Pulse Strategy Weekly, ran a story on invisible architects in tech projects. The centerpiece of the article? An anonymous source describes being replaced at the height of a multi-million-dollar contract by someone with the right look but none of the qualifications. The client refused to cooperate unless the original lead was reinstated. The article ends with a quote, "Corporate memory is short, but clients remember who shows up for the hard parts." My phone buzzed nonstop for hours. The piece went semi-viral on LinkedIn. Comments poured in, stories like mine, frustrations from other women, and even support from former clients who recognized the tone of what had been done to me and had likely experienced it too. Too real, too common, too powerful to ignore. Later that evening, Chloe found me at the kitchen table, still scrolling. "Mom," she said, grinning, "you broke LinkedIn." I laughed, really laughed. For the first time in weeks, I felt light, like I had taken back something no one else could have handed to me, my own narrative. But with every move forward, there's always a reaction. Monday morning brought a calendar invite. Urgent, Victor Crane. 10 o'clock a.m., executive conference room. No details, no agenda, just tension. I walked in calmly, wearing the same navy blue blazer I'd worn the day I closed Greenspring. Victor was already seated, flanked by two board members, and, surprise, surprise, Eva. She looked like she hadn't slept. Victor didn't waste time. Samantha, we're concerned about certain perceptions regarding recent events. It would be in everyone's best interest to clear the air. I smiled politely. Happy to help. Which part would you like me to clarify? The project I led? Or the silence I kept while others took credit? A pause. A twitch in his jaw. Eva looked like she wanted to disappear. One board member, an older gentleman I didn't recognize well, leaned forward. Miss Rhodes, would you be open to sharing your documentation of involvement in the Greenspring deal? Would I? I already had it printed, tabbed, and waiting in my briefcase. I pulled it out and handed it over without hesitation. Of course, I said. Transparency is in everyone's best interest. The board member flipped through my documentation with practiced eyes. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. The timeline was too detailed, the emails too clear, the truth too undeniable. Victor sat stiffly across the table, his fingers laced together, his jaw tight. Eva didn't look up once. I kept my voice calm. Every meeting, every draft, every client call, I logged it all. I don't say that to boast. I say it because this wasn't an accident. It was a pattern. I was removed with intention. There was a long silence. Then the board member looked at Victor. Why were these records not disclosed when we asked for project leadership verification last week? Victor cleared his throat. We were still reviewing the structure. A laugh nearly escaped me. Reviewing the structure? That was corporate speak for we were hoping no one would check. But they had. And now it was too late. Another board member, a woman I'd once briefly worked with on a separate initiative, spoke next. Victor, were you aware of Eva's lack of credentials prior to assigning her to lead Greenspring? He hesitated. She's learning, and her perspective brings energy we were missing. That was it. The boardroom went still. Cold. Too much. Too tone-deaf. Too dismissive. And then the older gentleman turned to me. So, Rhodes, if we were to formally reappoint you to the Greenspring contract as the project's strategic lead, would you accept? My chest tightened, not from fear but from surprise. After everything, they were offering it back? I took a breath. No, I said gently. The client has already asked me to work directly with them. And frankly, I intend to honor that. I'm not interested in a seat that was only offered after public pressure made silence impossible. That landed like a crack of thunder in the room. Victor's face turned red. But, I continued, I'm willing to support the transition on my terms to ensure the project's success, because I care about the outcome more than the optics. That part was true. Always had been. The board members exchanged a look. Then one of them nodded. We respect that, Ms. Rhodes, and we thank you for your integrity. We'll be initiating an internal review of executive project assignments, effective immediately. Translation: Victor was on thin ice. As I stood to leave, Eva finally looked up. There was something in her eyes, regret maybe, or just the shock of having the facade stripped away. Either way, it was too little, too late. I left the boardroom feeling lighter, not vindictive, not triumphant, just clear. I hadn't screamed, I hadn't begged, I hadn't played dirty. I had simply told the truth and waited for it to do what truth always does when given room. Expose. Correct. Rebalance. That evening, Ellen called. You handled that beautifully, she said. Did I? I asked. Oh, yes. Quiet power is still power, Samantha. I smiled, and for the first time, I believed it. 2 weeks later, I walked into Core Unity's downtown office, not as a vendor, not as a desperate employee hoping to reclaim a stolen seat, but as a trusted advisor with a contract that bore only one name at the top, mine. There was no fanfare, no red carpet, just quiet recognition and a new desk near the window overlooking the skyline. It was more than enough. Ellen greeted me with a knowing smile. "This feels right," she said, handing me a welcome folder. "It always should have been this way." I nodded. It just took the long way around. The first days were steady, honest, productive. I met with engineers, marketing leads, and finance. Not once did I need to assert authority. They listened because they remembered. They trusted me because I had earned that trust, not demanded it. Back at Norview, the aftermath continued. Victor was transitioned out with a vague press release full of corporate euphemisms. Eva quietly resigned a few days later. No one was surprised. Diane from HR sent me a note. "They thought you'd disappear quietly. Instead, you stood still and let the truth echo." That line stayed with me because I hadn't gone to war. I hadn't shouted, threatened, or burned bridges. I had simply refused to be erased. One afternoon, as I left a team session, a junior analyst approached me, early 20s, nervous, eyes full of admiration. "I read that Tech Pulse article. I think it was about you. If it wasn't, it still felt like it was." I smiled. Maybe it was. Maybe it was about all of us. She nodded. "I just wanted to say, it gave me courage." That moment meant more than any title ever had. I had always believed that loyalty mattered, that showing up every day and doing the works was enough. But sometimes, silence isn't strength, it's permission. And when the system is built to silence the right voices, refusing to disappear becomes the most radical act of all. Message and call to action. 100 words. Samantha's story is a reminder that not all victories are loud, and not all power wears a suit. Sometimes, the most courageous thing you can do is hold your ground when someone tries to push you out of your own legacy. Have you ever been sidelined for something you built? Has your quiet effort ever been taken for granted, or worse, rewritten by someone louder but less deserving? We'd love to hear your story, because somewhere out there, someone else needs to know they're not alone. Share your experience in the comments, and let's make sure quiet strength is never mistaken for weakness again. I didn't cry when I found out he stole my bonus. I didn't cry when he gave my project to someone else. But I cried the night I found a voice message from my mother, one I missed because I was in the office, coding through her last birthday. That was the night I realized I had become invisible in the very system I helped build. My name is Jade. I'm 37 years old, and for the last 8 years, I was the lead product strategist at a rising tech firm in Seattle. Not the face of the company, not the star on stage at conferences, but the one people came to when something needed to actually work. I never played office politics. I didn't care about recognition. What mattered to me was building something real, something that could scale, something that solved real problems. 6 months ago, Marcus, our CEO, called me into a closed-door meeting. He was always charming in that I read 2 books on charisma kind of way. He told me he had an opportunity, a game changer, a potential multi-million-dollar contract with a healthcare tech company. He said, "Jade, I need someone I can trust, someone who can lead this quietly." There wouldn't be a formal announcement. The project had to stay internal, off the record. I'd be the architect, the brain, the one laying the entire technical framework. And if I pulled it off, there's a performance bonus, equity too. Let's just say, this could be the last job you ever have to take. I didn't ask for paperwork. I should have. But after 8 years, loyalty does strange things to your judgment. And part of me wanted, so badly, to believe that finally, someone saw my worth. So, I got to work. For 6 months, I poured everything into that platform. I designed a secure data integration system that could handle patient records across 5 states. I rebuilt the back-end infrastructure from scratch. I skipped vacations. I worked weekends. I missed dinner with my daughter 3 times a week. I still remember that one night. I had just gotten home around 2:30 a.m., exhausted, drained. I opened my phone and saw a missed FaceTime from my daughter with a message. "Hi, Mommy. Are you coming to my dance recital tomorrow? I saved you the middle seat so you can see me spin." But I had another call scheduled at 6 a.m., so I set an alarm, closed my eyes, and told myself, after this project, things will change. They didn't. 3 weeks after we landed the $3 million contract, yes, Marcus stopped replying to my emails. The performance bonus never came. The equity? No written agreement, HR said. The credit? A junior associate was introduced as the technical visionary at the company's investor showcase. That's when something inside me began to crack. Not from anger, not yet, but from the quiet ache of being erased. I didn't just build the platform, I gave it my time, my health, my family moments I can't get back. And the man I trusted didn't even remember to say thank you. Or maybe he did. Maybe forgetting was part of the plan. I tried to stay calm, tried to believe it was a mistake, that the silence from Marcus was temporary, that HR just needed time to sort things out. I even gave it a few more days, showing up, attending meetings, continuing to lead my team like everything was fine. It wasn't. One Friday afternoon, I knocked on Marcus's office door. He didn't look up. "Got a minute?" He nodded, still typing. I stood there, hands folded, trying to steady my voice. "I wanted to check on the bonus we discussed, the equity. It's been almost a month since the launch, and Marcus cut me off with a half laugh. "Oh, that." He finally looked up. "Jade, you've done well. Really, but I think there's been a misunderstanding." I blinked. A misunderstanding? There was never a formal agreement, no signed document. I said we'd talk about it after the project was done, not that it was guaranteed. I felt my stomach drop. "You said—" "I said a lot of things," he interrupted again, smiling like this was a game. "We were under pressure. You rose to the occasion. But at the end of the day, we have to look at performance across the whole company, not just one project." And just like that, everything I had built, everything I had sacrificed, was dismissed like it meant nothing. I left his office with a frozen smile, walked past the same people I had worked late nights with, past the front desk where I used to bring donuts for the interns, past the framed photo of our team at last year's retreat, the one Marcus made me organize. By Monday, things got worse. I was removed from the client email threads. The engineering lead started reporting to someone else. My access to the codebase I had written was restricted for restructuring purposes. And then I saw it. At the monthly company update, a new face stood in front of my work. Lucas, a junior developer, smart kid, eager. But barely a year out of college, he was introduced by Marcus as the rising star who architected our latest success in healthcare tech. I felt my chest tighten. My name wasn't mentioned, not once. I left the meeting early and sat in the stairwell for over an hour, replaying his words in my head. The rising star who architected our latest success, my system, my 6 months, my sleepless nights. And now, his spotlight. I started waking up at 4 a.m. with panic attacks, not because I lost the bonus, but because something deeper had been stolen. My dignity, my sense of value. It's hard to explain to people who've never experienced it, what it's like to pour your soul into something, only to have it quietly erased while everyone else claps. I remember driving home one night, radio off, the city lights blurring in my tears. I whispered out loud, "What if I never mattered here at all?" That night, I opened my laptop, determined to start documenting everything. Emails, code changes, project outlines. Not for revenge. Not yet. Just clarity. Closure. That's when I noticed something, a legal note I'd bookmarked months ago, back when the project first started. In the absence of a signed IP transfer agreement, the intellectual property remains the default property of the creator. My fingers hovered above the trackpad. And suddenly, the erasure didn't feel so final anymore. I couldn't stop thinking about that one line. In the absence of a signed IP transfer agreement, it played in my head like a quiet bell in a dark hallway, distant but persistent. I didn't fully understand what it meant yet, but I knew one thing for sure. Something about this situation wasn't just unfair, it was wrong. Still, that realization didn't stop the slow, steady humiliation that followed. The next week, Lucas, yes, the rising star, was officially promoted to Product Innovation Lead. That had been my role in all but title for nearly 2 years. He moved into the corner office next to Marcus. They even had his nameplate ready. A shiny gold tag with clean black letters. Lucas reads, Innovation Lead. I stood there in the hallway, coffee in hand, looking at that nameplate like someone had slapped me across the face in public. I forced a smile when he walked by. Hey, Jade, he said. Hope you don't mind. They just asked me to take over some of your documentation. Marcus said you'd be stepping back. Stepping back? I hadn't been told anything. No conversation, no memo, not even a Slack message. I was just replaced. Too shocked to speak, I sat down at my desk, my hands shaking, and tried to remember what I'd even come in to do. Emails were flooding in about small bugs, updates, design tweaks. I answered them all, like a ghost trying to prove I was still alive. That afternoon, I got an invite to an internal leadership luncheon. I was the only department head who wasn't on the guest list. I stared at the screen for a long time before closing my laptop and walking out. That night, I pulled an old photo album off my bookshelf. It was from my daughter's first year of preschool, back when I still worked part-time and made it to every recital, every birthday, every parent lunch. Her chubby fingers in finger paint, her tiny shoes, her toothy grin when she saw me in the crowd. God, what happened to me? Somewhere along the line, I had traded being there for the promise of being valued. And now, I had neither. A few days later, the final blow came. It was an all-hands meeting. Marcus was presenting our company's vision for innovation to the board and senior staff. The lights dimmed. A video played. A slick, professionally edited montage of our healthcare platform launch. It showcased sleek UI screens, data dashboards, smiling clients, and Lucas in every single frame. He was explaining the system I built, pointing to the infrastructure I designed, using my exact words from earlier presentations. He even had the gall to mimic my hand gestures. I could feel the blood rushing to my face. It was too much. Too much disrespect. Too much erasure. Too much betrayal. I left before the applause started. I couldn't bear to hear it. I drove for hours that evening, no destination in mind. Just open roads and the sound of my own breathing. Too angry to cry, too tired to scream, I ended up in front of my mother's old house, the one we sold after she passed. I hadn't been back since. I sat in the car, staring at the dark windows, remembering her voice. She once told me, if they take your work, they take nothing. If they take your belief in yourself, they take everything. At that moment, I realized Marcus hadn't stolen my success. He had stolen my reflection of it. And I had let him. The next morning, something shifted. I arrived at the office before anyone else and sat quietly in the break room, staring at the coffee pot like it might whisper the next step. Instead, I pulled out my laptop and went back to that legal note. This time, I didn't just skim it. I read every clause, every line, every case example. I started making copies, files, prototypes, time-stamped drafts. I uploaded versions to my private drive. I backed up emails, conversations, screenshots of Slack threads. Not for revenge, not yet. But because I had finally remembered what I had forgotten in the midst of trying to be liked, accepted, and included, I created this. Not Marcus, not Lucas, me. And maybe, just maybe, I still had more power than I thought. Anger doesn't always arrive with shouting. Sometimes it comes quietly, like a low hum under your skin, a pulse of clarity that sharpens everything around you. That's what it felt like the morning I walked into the office, coffee in hand, fully aware that I was no longer a part of the team I helped build. No more illusions, no more justifications. They hadn't just taken credit for my work. They'd rewritten the narrative and erased me from it. That realization didn't break me. It lit something on fire. I started seeing things for what they were. The fake smiles, the patronizing praise, the way people looked through me during meetings, like I was furniture. I heard whispers I hadn't noticed before. Is she even on this project anymore? Or, didn't Lucas build that whole back end? It was infuriating. But the worst part? I had helped them do it, by staying silent, by trusting the wrong people, by not fighting back the first time they minimized me. Never again. I spent every night that week pulling together a full technical timeline, my architecture drafts, version histories, commit logs. I even exported Zoom transcripts from early design calls where Marcus had praised my system as revolutionary. But the goldmine came when I searched the company drive for a file I had shared early in the project. There it was. IP transfer j.docs draft only. It was still labeled as draft. They never had me sign it. Oh my God. I sat back in my chair, stunned. After everything, after they gutted my role, stole my credit, and pretended I never existed, they forgot to legally secure the most valuable thing I had built. It was laughable, ridiculous, infuriating. They had built $1 million deal on a legal oversight, my oversight. That's when the idea hit me. I didn't need to beg for what was owed to me. I didn't even need to confront Marcus. Yet. What I needed was leverage. So I called an old friend, Nina, a tech attorney I met at a Women in Leadership conference years ago. We hadn't spoken in a while, but when I explained the situation, her voice sharpened. They're using your software without a signed IP agreement? Jade, that's not just unethical. It's potentially catastrophic for them, especially if they're already collecting revenue from it. I couldn't believe it. I felt a rush of adrenaline, and for the first time in weeks, something close to joy. I knew it felt wrong, I said. It is wrong, she replied, and you're not powerless. You just forgot how powerful you are. Wow, that line hit me hard. She was right. Somewhere along the way, I had shrunk myself to fit into a space that was never meant to hold me. That night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and stared at my reflection. Not the tired eyes or the quiet sadness, but the woman behind it, the builder, the architect, the one who made things work. I whispered to myself, they thought I was done, but they had no idea what was coming. It's strange how clear everything becomes once you stop asking for permission. After that call with Nina, I didn't sleep much, but it wasn't the panicked kind of insomnia anymore. It was the kind that comes from focus, from purpose, from the sharp buzz of a mind building something again. But this time, I wasn't building a product. I was building my strategy. The first thing I did was collect every trace of my authorship, the technical documentation, the initial architecture maps, early code commits tied to my user ID, Slack discussions, time-stamped mock-ups with my initials. I created a secured cloud folder labeled Evidence, Do Not Touch, and gave Nina access. She reviewed the files and said, Jade, this is airtight. Honestly, I've seen companies sued for less. God. That felt good to hear. But we weren't going to sue. Not yet. Instead, we sent something simpler and far more effective. A cease and desist letter, drafted carefully, wrapped in legal authority, and delivered directly to Marcus and the company's legal team. The letter clearly outlined the facts. That the core system of their flagship healthcare platform was built solely by me. Yeah. That no signed IP transfer had ever been executed. That any further use or licensing of that system without my written consent would be considered a violation of intellectual property law. We gave them 7 business days to respond. 7 days. I'll never forget the feeling when Nina hit send. I closed my eyes and exhaled, deeply. For the first time in months, I felt my spine straighten. This was real. This was happening. I was taking my voice back. The response didn't come from Marcus. It came from the company's general counsel. A carefully worded, thinly veiled attempt at intimidation, claiming I had acted within the scope of employment and therefore had no separate claim of ownership. But the mistake was glaring. They still couldn't produce a signed IP transfer, because there wasn't one. I expected Nina to be cautious, but instead she laughed. "They're bluffing," she said, "and they know it. That's why they're not threatening legal action. They're afraid you'll be the one to file first." It was surreal. The same people who once made me feel so small, now scrambling behind conference room doors trying to figure out how to keep my silence. How ironic. But I didn't stop there. I reached out, quietly, to the healthcare client. The $3 million contract they had signed. That platform they were promised? It had my name written all over it, metaphorically and technically. I met with their CTO over coffee. We talked for 2 hours. When I showed him my documentation, he turned pale. "You built all of this?" "Yes," I said calmly. "And they're selling it without the legal right to do so." He rubbed his jaw, visibly disturbed. "Jade, we don't want to be caught in the middle of a legal war. If you had your own entity, we'd much rather deal with you directly." "Wait, what?" I nearly dropped my coffee. "You're saying, if I had a company, you'd consider switching?" "Consider?" he said. "We'd prefer it." My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from possibility. That night, I filed the paperwork to form my own LLC. I called it Northbridge Insight, a nod to the architecture framework I had designed. It felt surreal, submitting that form, setting up the domain, opening the business account. But even more surreal, knowing they had no idea what was coming. Marcus still thought I was licking my wounds somewhere in silence. But while he was trying to protect his title, I was building a new one. It all unfolded faster than I expected. Just 3 weeks after filing my LLC and having that quiet coffee with the client's CTO, I received an official request for proposal, addressed not to the company I used to work for, but to me, to Northbridge Insight. They were ready to cut ties with Marcus's firm, and they wanted a new contract. With me, I didn't rush it. I had Nina draft the proposal carefully, outlining everything: scope, pricing, terms of service, legal ownership clauses, all ironclad. When we submitted it, I half expected the board to hesitate. They didn't. They signed within 4 days. 4 days. The contract was worth more than I ever imagined, partly because they added a retainer for future platform improvements, and partly because they respected something Marcus never did. They knew who actually built the thing. The news hit Marcus like a bullet through glass. He found out the same day I did. Apparently, the client's team had notified his firm that the contract would be terminated immediately, citing unresolved legal and compliance concerns. It must have been chaos. A $3 million deal collapsing overnight, after they had already announced it to investors, celebrated it in press releases, and built their entire Q4 projections around it. The next morning, I got a call from someone I hadn't heard from in months. Sarah, a project manager, who had always been kind to me in quiet ways. Her voice was shaky. "Jade, what did you do?" I paused, then said gently, "I took back what was mine." She laughed, half in awe, half in disbelief. "Marcus is losing his mind. He stormed out of the board meeting this morning. Investors are threatening to pull out." I didn't celebrate, not outwardly. But inside, I've never felt more whole. 2 days later, the company issued a bland internal memo. "Due to shifting client relationships and restructuring, we are undergoing leadership changes effective immediately." Translation? Marcus was out, disgraced, removed, silenced. No farewell party, no thank you speech. Just an empty office, cleared out before lunch. His nameplate gone. His legacy shattered by one oversight, one lie, and one woman he thought he could silence. Too bad. A week after his departure, I walked into that same building for a scheduled meeting, this time not as an employee, but as the CEO of the partner company. Every pair of eyes in the lobby turned to me, some in shock, some in guilt, some in something closer to admiration. Even Lucas looked stunned as he passed me by in the hallway. And I smiled, not because I wanted revenge, not even because I wanted recognition, but because, for the first time, I wasn't being introduced into the room. I was the one leading it. We sat across from each other in the glass conference room, board members, legal reps, new execs, and me. I presented the transition plan professionally, answered questions clearly, and laid out timelines with precision. No raised voices, no bitterness, just competence, presence, power. At the end of the meeting, one of the senior advisors leaned in and said, "We should have been working with you all along." I nodded. "You still can." And I meant it, because I wasn't there to destroy what was left. I was there to replace it. It's strange how calm everything felt afterward. No fireworks, no dramatic declarations, just a quiet, steady peace that settled over my life like the first morning after a long storm. I was working more than ever, leading a small but powerful team at Northbridge Insight. We had new contracts, new ideas, and for the first time in years, I felt seen. Not just for what I produced, but for who I was. My daughter noticed it too. "You smile more now, Mommy," she said one night as I tucked her in. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "I feel more like myself again." There were still days when I thought about Marcus, about that building, about the years I spent waiting for someone else to validate me. But those thoughts didn't sting anymore. They reminded me of how far I had come, and how easy it is to lose yourself in the noise of ambition and approval. I didn't need to burn bridges. I just had to build my own. A month later, I passed by the old office tower. The glass windows reflected the sun the same way they always had. But everything inside had changed, and so had I. I wasn't invisible anymore, because I had finally stopped asking to be seen and started claiming my place instead. Too many of us give years, sometimes decades, to places that never truly saw us. We shrink ourselves to fit into systems not built for us, hoping hard work will speak for itself. But sometimes you have to speak for yourself. You don't need permission to take back what's yours. You don't need validation to protect your worth. You just need one moment of courage. Have you ever stayed silent when you should have spoken up? Or walked away when you knew it was time? Share your story in the comments. You never know who it might help find their voice again.